Hey, welcome back to Garbro's Field Desk. I have for you Chapter 12 of the Veil Riders, Book 4. Like, subscribe, comment down below. Here we go. Chapter 12. The Negotiation from Hell. Yule never was much of a cat person, and that wasn't changing at the current point either. On his side of the meeting table was Alavara, Yethis, Erinda, Caine, Domino, and Chicks, as he had only been allowed 5 people to come in with him. On the other side of the meeting table was Anwa Kurhi, the current big ear of the Serbnyan peoples. Beside him was one of his daughters, Little Ear Nimi Kurhi, as well as some other royal members he didn't really pay much mind to. Nimi was wearing an odd kind of shawl around her neck made of a light fabric, and she hid the bottom of her face often with it if someone was staring at her. The Serbnyans were an odd people, looking to Yule like someone had mashed together a bobcat and a North American badger. Their ears were short, sharply angled, and tufted with fur, and Yule knew that Yethis wanted to do nothing more than to play with them. He had to move her to where Chicks had been sitting after only a few minutes into the meeting, further away from one of the Serbnyan delegates. The next oddest thing about the Serbnyans were their noses. They did not have a snout like the gnolls did, but were still animal-like in nature with a broad facing, as if someone had simply erased their humanoid nose and penciled in something different. Their skin was patchy in some areas, making them even more unlike the gnolls. The bridge of their nose was adorned with a short fur, black lines running down them much like the American badger and flowing up into the forehead and eyebrows. This face fur was only on the nose though, and the rest of their face was normal flesh. This odd pattern of fur kept going along their shoulders, the skin of the clavicles flowing into a short layer of fur that traveled all the way down until it faded back out at the deltoid. Yule only knew this because the Serbnyans found the castle stifling and were wearing open-collared, short-sleeved tunics. What Yule still couldn't figure out was whether or not their black hands were fur or just skin pigmentation. Despite their pale skin, they started turning black at the elbow, all the way down to their strong-looking fingers and thick nails. Though Yule couldn't see their legs, he had caught a glimpse at one of the female delegate's leg due to her wearing a split robe, and he was pretty sure they were skinned from the waist down until about the knees, and he figured it must have been the same as the hands. Another oddity was that while 3 of the Serbnyans had black fur, Big Ear Anwakurhi had golden fur, while his daughter had purple fur instead. They were also extremely short. Yule had thought they would be at least 5 feet tall, but it seemed like only their ears would get them near that number. Queen Madmiran entered the meeting room with her own assistants, her marshal in tow as usual, and Yule had to admire her steeled resolve. While it had been rough, she had managed to hold herself together as her husband was taken to be prepared for burial, and had had little time to grieve before the Serbnyans arrived. To Anwak's credit, he had attempted to postpone the meeting for a few more days to let the queen have her time to process the death of her husband, but she had declined. Yule surmised that was because she had been grieving the entire time he failed to wake, and his death may have been the final pull the Band-Aid needed. Anwak had been taken aback by her willingness to push aside her personal feelings in order to do business, and Yule was afraid he may have taken that for callousness. Anwak was the first to rise from his chair, more due to the fact he was shorter and closer to the floor, and everyone else stood as the queen's own chair was pulled out, taking the head of the table.
Big Ear Kurhi, Warlord Yule, thank you for joining me in my meeting chambers.
Queen Madmiran said easily, gesturing for them all to sit as she did so.
As per our agreement, I am to preside as mediator between you two parties and do my best to see that each of you see themselves squared on the terms of your deal. Despite the passing of my husband, this is an extremely important assembly for all parties involved, and I did not wish to see it postponed any further.
Queen Madmirin opened a large leather tome that was set before her, a scribe opening her own book to take notes of what was spoken during the meeting.
Big Ear Kurhi has come before my meeting table seeking a deal with Warlord Yule, and let us not delay any further.
She gestured to the Serbnyan, who leaned his head back and flicked both his ears. Despite the fact he was clearly trying to look imposing, Yule could feel the vibration of Yethis and her desire to pet Anwak. We Serbnyans are coming before Yule in hopes of brokering a trade deal, Anwak said, his voice surprisingly deep for his height. We are hearing many rumors from the south of shortages within of your supply line. Fuel, as of you say, has been of difficult for variers to produce. We Serbnyans are finding minerals that could have alleviating the supply issue. Yule had already thought this was the case, as he had been made aware of the rumors himself, and he nodded at Anwak to continue. Anwak nodded to his council, who drew out 2 samples of the minerals from wooden crates. Serbnyans are finding what we are calling amalin and dethrolkin. Minerals are of mundane effect and were not of noticing much from them, believing them to be of chaff and waste. The 2 Serbnyans handling the minerals slowly began to bring them close to each other, and Yule furrowed his brows as he saw the air between them start to shimmer. However, when 2 chaff piles being of mixed together for disposing, there was of a superheated explosion, Anwak said with a nod, and the 2 minerals were pushed together closer. Yule watched very closely as the 2 minerals began to heat up to the point the 2 flat facings began to glow, and he slowly leaned forward in interest. The once pale and shale-colored minerals were now glowing as if they were molten, the air shimmering between them with radiant heat waves.
Big Ear Kurhi, my table,
Queen Madmirin said with stern politeness, pointing to the growing scorch mark on the once perfectly stained wood. Anwak looked down at the table, his large badger-like ears perking in alarm. Oh, apologies. With a laugh, Anwak prattled off to the 2 Serbnyans holding the minerals, and they backed them away from each other. Chicks raised an eyebrow, noticing many distinctly Russian words being spoken in the language. Yule watched the 2 minerals slowly cool, the surfaces more round and deformed than they used to be. Chicks and Domino were both leaning in towards Yule with keen eyes, and Yule sat back to them, leaning his head towards them as they whispered into his ears. Yethis and Erinda Caine were lost as to what the humans were whispering about, but Alavara now freely coiled her mental tendrils around Yule, her mind filling with the visions of machines that she simply could not comprehend. There were some things she knew, though, such as gouts of steam, but the large tubes of rotating fan blades confused her greatly. Yule nodded to Domino and Chicks, then leaned forward, resting his laced fingers on the table as he addressed Anwak. Do these work underwater? Underwater, Anwak said with a puzzled tone, looking from side to side at the members of his own council. Wouldn't that make of the stones becoming cool? Yule looked towards Queen Madmirin, nodding his head forward respectively. Is there any way that your staff can provide us with a large bucket of water? Queen Madmirin eyed Yule quizzically, but nodded towards multiple members of the castle staff that waited patiently nearby. Within minutes, a large half-keg bucket of water was brought into the meeting room, the 2 Valley Elves hefting it, sweating heavily at the brow and back. Oh, that's on me. I forgot there were stairs. Yule said with a roll of the head, feeling instantly bad about making the 2 elves carry the damn thing up multiple spiral staircases. Yethis, give them some coin, please.
Right away.
Yethis said with a giggle, hopping out of her chair and pulling out multiple shank pieces from her belt pouch. Anwak looked at the bucket, then back to Yule. What is the meaning of this? Is this of a trick? Of test? It is a test, yes. Yule said calmly, though his smile was warm and friendly, something that made everyone around him nervous. Could you place those two minerals together in that bucket? Anwok rumbled lowly in his throat, unsure of what the human was up to, but waved a hand at the two other Serbnyans holding the minerals. Do it. Nervously, the two Serbnyans walked over towards the bucket, looked at each other, then placed the minerals down into the water. As they closed the distance between their hands, the water began to quickly heat up, and they both wrenched their hands free of the rapidly boiling water. Yule, Chicks, and Domino all watched with narrowed eyes as the water boiled extremely fast, steam pouring out of the water bucket and pooling towards the ceiling.
It could work,
Chick said quietly, watching the Serbnyans try and grab the two minerals away from each other with long pairs of tongs.
If the dwarves built it tough and we used the framework for a regular turbine.
Domino held a finger to his lips, and Chicks nodded, realizing she had been getting too excited.
It would solve the little issue we're running into. This could be good for the civilian sector.
Domino agreed, both he and Chicks looking to Yule as he crossed his arms along his broad chest. Alavara was nearly vibrating from the adrenaline coursing off the minds of the three humans, as they were only just barely keeping themselves under control in the presence of this simple little mineral. What is the cost of me for this bargain? Yule asked Anwok, keeping his tone neutral. As with human culture and yours, nothing comes without a price. Anwok slapped his large, padded hand to the table. Of 3 requests. First of being absolute exclusivity of trade between the Serbnyans and yours. Even if this mineral is found elsewhere, Cosmoling Company and all affiliates only buy and trade it through we Serbnyans. Queen Madmiran went to speak up, but raised her eyebrows in surprise when Yule spoke up first. Done. But I want to negotiate a standard price by weight that only changes through agreement of all parties involved here at this table, including Queen Madmiran, Yule said. As well, she gets a small cut of profits from the sale of this mineral. Done. Anwok said with another slap of the table, and the Serbnyans around him looked pleased. Yule remained calm, cool, and collected as Domino and Chicks leaned forward. The second, access to the trade roads and all of markets as per agreement and control of Cosmoling Company and all affiliates, Anwok said, placing his large furry hands on his hips. Yule held up a hand. In fairness to Queen Madmiran, I will agree to these terms as long as all trade of this mineral is done here in Chapstow City. This will allow her to benefit from the trade caravans and give her exclusivity in terms of the mineral passing through here. Do you agree, ma'am? Queen Madmiran looked, again, surprised that Yule would offer her such a crucial and strong element to the agreement so freely. She thought about it for a moment, looking down at the scorch mark on the table, then looked up to Yule.
I believe I can agree to such a term. That would allow us direct access to the Serbnyan market, something that no one else has access to. Do you find that agreeable, Big Ear Kurhi?
Agreeable, Anwok said joyfully, slapping the table again. Queen Madmiran flinched every time he did that, and it was starting to annoy her something fierce. Yethis looked to Erinda Caine and started murmuring something in the Oni's ear, and they both smiled. And your third request? Yule asked, stress bleeding off of his spirit like steam from the now rather dry bucket. Anwok held his hands out to the table. Of the smallest thing to ask of this meeting when all of things considered. Warlord Yule will take little Nimi Kurhi as his second wife and to solidify my household with his own. The room became so quiet that a pin being dropped could have been heard outside, on the first floor. No one moved except for the Serbnyans at the table, looking around in confusion as to why everyone went quiet. Queen Madmiran paused, as if to fully take in what Anwok had said, then physically recoiled with a shake of the shoulders, her eyebrows off kilter on her stunned face. Her marshal, Cern, nearly laughed out loud, only held in check by his martial training. It didn't last long as his body recoiled when he saw Chicks do the same thing on Yule's side of the table. First Sergeant Erinda Caine, despite herself, let out a quiet of an exhale, too stunned to really make any other noises. Yethis looked as if someone had struck her upside the face with a stick, leaning sideways in her chair. Anwak swallowed a little as he saw Yule's face harden, Alavara's eyes go wide, and Chicks have to lunge to the side to stifle her shoulder-bucking laughter, having met eyes with Cern, who was struggling through the same ailment. Queen Madmiran leapt to her feet before Yule could go airborne across the table, her cloth boot heels clacking against the polished wooden floor.
Vitka! That is an outrageous demand to make of Warlord Yule! He has already taken a romance!
Eh? Anwak said, turning to look at Queen Madmiran. We are of healing humans taking of multiple wives. Yule is also of a warlord. This is common. Little Ear Nimi looked quite embarrassed as she looked from her father to Yule, then quickly ducked her head with short, jerky movements. Alavara, her tendrils latching onto Yule and Nimi at the same time, blocked out the sounds of Queen Madmiran and Big Ear Kurhi verbally sparring with each other, instead focusing on Yule first. To her relief, the man was horrified at the third request and was mentally reeling. There was also the now dreading, horrified reality of him no longer having access to this mineral. Alavara's tendrils ripped into his brain like vipers, and her own heart dropped when she digested enough of the thoughts to understand how important the minerals were. The humans knew how to make something called a steam turbine and steam engine, machines that could convert steam into raw energy and make even larger machines move. What Alavara found interesting was how Yule kept thinking that it was perfect. It required no fuel, just the mineral, water, lubricants, and the machine itself. She saw long platforms moving at high rates of speed, little vehicles tutting around with little hisses of steam, and the actual importance of the mineral crashed down onto Alavara like the weight of a mountain. She switched over to Little Ear Nimi and found that she was mostly terrified, embarrassed, and afraid of Alavara. Apparently, the Serbnyans thought Yule would be A-okay with taking her as a wife, or as a concubine at the least, and saw the mineral as nothing more than a valuable magical element the humans may be able to make use of. They had no idea about the engines, or the other machines that could change the entire landscape of the world itself. As she probed all of them, even Anwak, none of them knew about the machines. They only knew the mineral heated up. The dire reality of this meeting, and its critical strategic importance in terms of affecting the war, could mean the difference between losing or winning the entire conflict. She had to think fast on her feet, as Queen Madmiran and Anwak were now screaming at each other across the table. It is of simple request, Anwak bellowed, slamming his fist on the table. You Southerners have been of doing it for centuries. Queen Madmiran jabbed a finger at Anwak, a rather major step in terms of a meeting between royal houses of nobility.
It is not simple at all! You are demanding the man set aside his love for a single woman in order to gain a boon. The request is diabolical. To strong-arm him in such a way just to cement your own power line.
Is my Nimi not of pretty enough for a human then, eh? His humans have been taking multiple partners of all southern races, but now we are not of good enough? Anwak shouted, gesturing towards Alavara. Are only elves of good enough for a human as a mate? Are we Serbnyans still seen as ice-waste beasts to you southerners?
This is not an issue of race or place of birth.
Queen Madmiran countered, coming around the edge of the table to point directly at Anwak. Her eyes were threatening to tear up as her staff all loomed forward, poised to keep her from striking Anwak should her humors rise to such a level.
Love is sacred, as is marriage. We know nothing of human culture or how many subcultures there may be. What if Yule is from a human tribe that only marries one person? You may have insulted him and doomed us all, you little fool.
This statement actually took Anwak back a little, and his head twitched as he formulated a reply. Alavara quickly wrapped all her tendrils around Yule, searching for an answer, and her heart panged from within her chest. Yule wasn't going to agree. He had no interest or desire to take on another spouse, let alone another person, and he was already formulating another way to get the mineral by force and bloodshed. Alavara took in a shuddering breath as Yule's face hardened, his muscles poised to slowly raise him up onto his feet and decline Anwak's final request, even if that meant failing and never gaining access to the mineral by other peaceful means. Anwak was first, rounding on Queen Madmiran with his hackles raised and nose wrinkled. If my Nimi will not be of his second wife, then she will be of no one's wife, and no one will ever see a mineral from we Serbnyans. If it is of such a big problem, Yule does not even of having to marry her, but he will be of taking her into his home as a safeguard to the Serbnyans. What he does of with her after our agreement is none of my concern as long as she is alive and of cared for. Alavara stood to her feet as quickly as she could as she saw Yule's shoulders twitch forward, beating him to the punch.
Your third request is acceptable,
Alavara said quickly, her crimson hair fraying out from the whirlwind of thoughts and nerves in the room. She knew that all Anwak wanted was an inside when it came to Yule. Whether he took his daughter as a concubine, maid, or as a mate, it didn't matter to him, and it made Alavara quietly worry about little ear Nimi a little. Again, the room went deadly quiet. Queen Madmiran and Anwak rounded on Alavara, their eyebrows drawn together at her speaking up. Yethis leaned forward in outrage, her face twisted in a confused snarl of indignation that a pass would be allowed for this little ice creature and not her. Chicks and Domino looked over to Alavara, a single eye squinted, but the smiles on their faces were both approving and surprised. Then there was Yule, who stood up slowly, blinking at her. Alavara, Yule started, but Alavara placed her hand on top of his.
I know,
Alavara said in a particular tone, one that Yule picked up on instantly. Yule swallowed, taking in a deep breath as he looked at her. Then his eyes softened as he leaned down and whispered to Alavara, "There are other ways. I can find them. There's no need to drag that poor woman into this."
This is easier.
Alavara whispered back, then squeezed his hand.
I saw what you know. This is important. We can figure things out later. Do what you have to do now to secure what we need. We can figure her out later, too.
It's going to be far more difficult than that. This is a whole other person we're going to have to do something with. She's going to have her own expectations, and there will be political expectations from her father. I don't know how things work here, but on Earth, these kinds of people are going to want children, heirs, more anchors on my name to cement their ties to any power I may wield. I don't do these kinds of things. Yule thought to her, and she felt the worry and deep apprehension at this deal. I know my fellow humans have been indulgent themselves, but I do not follow the same path. His discomfort was palpable, but she was there to steady him. Alavara nodded to Yule, then gave his hand a squeeze as she turned to look at both Queen Madmiran and Anwak. Yule looked at Alavara for another long second, then turned to Anwak, his voice steady but clearly furious. I agree to your third and final request, Big Ear Curry. Little Ear Nemi looked up at Yule, her ears perked and eyes wide. She quickly jerked her shawl up a little higher to hide her nose and mouth, her eyes darting between Alavara and Yule respectively. Anwak took in a deep breath, steadying himself and trying to cool the rapidly growing anger within him, and finally let his ears relax. Very well. Queen Madmiran, can you have writing up our contract?
I can.
Queen Madmiran said in a stately manner, though she looked at Alavara with eyes that asked,
How could you ever manage such a thing? What have you done?
Alavara gave her a reassuring smile and a nod of her head. Then Yule picked up her hand and gave her knuckles a kiss. Little Ear Nimi, despite herself, smiled from underneath her shawl as she saw the gesture, her ears giving a twitching flick. My apologies, Queen Madmiran, Anwak said, smoothing down his warm weather tunic. My anger got the better of me. I apologize for my tone. Queen Madmiran took in a deep breath, then slowly clasped her hands together.
I must apologize as well. I let my own feelings get in the way of this matter, and I should have kept a more civilized tone.
I believe now would be a good time for tea, Yule said to the room, his face the hardest that anyone on his side of the table had ever seen it. And you may want to bring in your steward and his staff to draft this contract. Queen Madmiran nodded.
I agree. How do your people take their tea, Big Ear Kurhi?
Sweet with milk, Anwak said, his own staff letting out a sigh of relief and running their hands through their hair to wick away the nervous sweat. Queen Madmiran's nose wrinkled, her voice twinged with disgust.
Of course.
Chicks snorted at this, then broke into a loud gale of laughter with Cern, the two having finally broken after they made eye contact from around their leaders. While the papers were being drawn up by Queen Madmiran's law council, both Yule and the Serbnyans were temporarily retired to 2 holding rooms, fully furnished with couches, tea, small snacks on trays, as well as their own small staff of servants should a need arise. The servants nearly recoiled into the walls when Yule threw his patrol cap into a bank of curtains, Chicks barely managing to close the door in time before Yule launched into a fit of rage.
Who even does that?
Yule bellowed as several nearby Valley Elf servants bolted for the safety of the small buffet table.
How can he expect to make an entire trade deal and tie in his daughter with it? What kind of backwards-ass country do they come from?
First Sergeant Erinda Caine politely cleared her throat, then bounced on the balls of her feet as she placed her hands in the small of her back. Yule slowly turned towards the dark yellow Oni, his eyes livid.
Yes, First Sergeant.
It is quite common in the north, sir.
Erinda Caine said with airy professionalism, trying not to smile at Yule as he quietly fumed.
The Snow King Sivan has over 5 wives himself. The orcs are prolific polygamists as they seek to birth the strongest children, and the Sea's End region is well known for men taking multiple wives due to a curse that lays upon the land.
Yethis nodded in agreement, although she seemed as angry as Yule at the moment.
The Sea's End is harsh on males of any race, as they tend to wither away unless they possess a certain trait that we have yet to identify. The cold reaches are much the same way, but there's still the normality of monogamy, unless a certain person is rich enough to support more than one spouse. We Valley Elves only practice polygamy should a husband or wife fail to produce children in order to ensure a strong family survives.
At the last sentence, Alavara and Yethis both shared a heated side glance, the two of them nearly producing sparks in the air between them.
Why would there be a spare princess then? She is a princess, right?
Domino asked, ignoring all the drama behind him and instead putting servings of food onto a plate from the buffet.
You would think she'd already been pawned off to some other royal family if this is the Serbnyan custom.
There was a knock at the door and Chicks opened it, taking a letter from a Veil Rider auxiliary. She then closed it and folded open the letter, tutting her tongue as she quickly read.
Apt timing.
Chicks said, giving the letter a little wave.
On the way up here, I saw one of our troopers and sent them off on a little information gathering.
They were quick about it. Appears this little ear Nimmy is completely unwanted.
Unwanted?
Domino asked, turning around and biting down on a roll as Yule started winging pillows across the room, tearing them from a couch and pelting them into a wall.
She's extremely shy. Her ears were deemed too large for Serbnian beauty standards. Her tail wags too much when she's happy, and she cannot find minerals to save her life.
Chick said, leaning backwards as one of Yule's pillow projectiles went wide.
According to the quick questions of the auxiliary, she was deemed too unladylike by the Serbnyans, and Big Ear Curry has had a measurable headache trying to figure out what to do with her. Her eyes do not sparkle like shimmerstone or opal like her sisters, but are normal amber. Her fur was not gold like theirs either, but is instead that dusky violet color. She is apparently too boring to marry off.
Domino chuckled as he watched Yule punch and beat the ever-living shit out of a couch cushion, the servants in the room watching him with wide, worried eyes.
Does it say why she wears that weird head wrapping thing? I thought it was pretty cute, but the rest of the Serbnyans keep looking at it with these narrowed-eyed glances like it stunk.
Chicks hummed to herself as she read down the letter, then shrugged.
May have to do with how shy she is.
Why is this even important?
Yethis spat out, placing her hands on her hips.
Why are you humans so intent on having these rocks? All they did was boil water. Blood magicians can boil water. I can boil water!
Yule, temper finally boiling over, grabbed the couch from the bottom edge and flipped it through the air with a roar of anger. It crashed against a side table and a bookshelf, the entire ensemble crashing to the floor with ground thundering thumps and bangs. At this point, all the staff in the room were now behind the buffet table and the assumed safety of Domino.
That's enough, boss man.
Domino said as he smacked his lips, enjoying a creamy dessert that had a lot of fruit on it. He had to fight in order to not openly chuckle at the still fuming Yule.
If you go on any longer like that, the queen is going to bill you for the furniture.
Yule turned around and spat out a colorful string of English curses. Yethis and Erinda Caine figuring they must have been quite grisly from the faces Chicks and Domino pulled. Alavara, on the other hand, knew exactly what the words meant, having been reading Yule's mind the entire time, and she figured Yule had had enough of a moment to release his anger naturally. Using her mental tendrils, she reached out to Yule and wrapped him in them, massaging and pulling away the vitriolic rage that was building inside of the human. She did this all while walking over towards Domino, plucking a piece of fruit from one of the dishes and popping it into her mouth while Yule visibly deflated.
Doing your thing?
Domino quietly asked her. Alavara gave him a sly side glance, but said nothing as she chewed on the fruit. She gave his mind a light touch with one of her tendrils and found that Domino had believed the myth wholesale the first time he heard it, as it had been spun into him by Savers.
So,
Erinda Caine said politely, still rocking back and forth on her boots.
the mineral, why is it so important?
Yule straightened up slowly, another pillow still death-gripped in his fist, and he let out an exhale that was ringed with hatred. Turbines. Yethis cocked her head at the English word.
Turbines?
Engines that are powered by steam, Yule said lowly, the pillow landing on the ground with a dull puff of air as he released it. With enough steam, they can power entire cities. Vehicles can be built with steam-powered engines and use them to transport goods, all without using up the fuel we need for combat vehicles. Yethis blinked a few times, then pursed her lips in thought while Erinda Caine took a step forward.
How can steam power an engine?
Erinda Caine asked, as she too was struggling with the concept.
Steam is just hot air. Combustion makes sense because it's more or less a controlled tiny explosion. But how do you humans hope to power an entire engine with just hot air?
Chicks chuckled.
It is more than just hot air, First Sergeant. Now, while Yule is talking about turbines and engines, I'm sure he's also thinking about heavyweight pullers like trains.
We've been working with the dwarves in reference to underground trains. Keeps them safe from enemy eyes.
Domino chimed in.
But they run on coal, and tests have been fouling the air. It requires air ducts to be dug out, and it has been a headache.
Yule sniffed angrily. I was more thinking about larger steam turbines or engines in large trucks. He turned to Erinda Caine. Imagine, First Sergeant, a single, massive truck that could haul thousands of tons of supplies on a guide rail, assisted by a living driver, all running on just water and emitting vapor. No need for fuel, no exhaust, just heat and steam. The coin seemed to drop for Erinda Caine as well as Yethis, even though Alavara was following along with the thoughts of the humans in the room.
This would follow into the civilian sector,
Chick said, taking a deep drink from a wine glass before setting it down on another side table.
We humans have made steam-powered cars before. They were just inefficient due to the need of a fuel source such as coal, gasoline, or large batteries for electric heaters. The fact we can power an engine with just a tank of water, condensers, boilers, other equipment, and 2 magical stones, well...
Domino dusted his hands off, having cleaned his plate rather quickly.
It means free energy. I saw what those stones did, and they only started to degrade when they got too close. If we can manage how close the stones get and keep them from overheating, it's the perfect energy source for transport vehicles.
What would happen to our war vehicles then?
Erinda Caine asked. They will stay combustion. Steam engines would lack the immediate power required to move a tank or scout car during combat movements, Yule said, tossing a nearby pillow back onto the upside-down couch. Motorcycles, trucks, cars, they can all benefit from the steam engines or larger turbines. Yethis' face appeared to darken as the full realization of Yule's actions hit her, and she slowly stepped backwards with faltering footfalls until she fell into a chair.
This is all to consume less fuel, to help the war effort. If we have steam-powered trucks that can haul fuel, we won't have a shortage.
Yes, Yule murmured dourly. These stones could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The Fae can drag in oil, diesel, gasoline, and aviation fuel as much as they want through the Veil when they're able to wrangle it. We don't have the luxury. The current output of our biofuel is not enough, and we chew through too much of it just trying to supply our units. Erinda Caine held out a hand.
Why don't we just stall and try to get better terms? These kinds of deals are normally made over the course of a week. Why do we have to try and hammer this out in just a single day? I'm sure if we spend a little more time we can likely scrape out the requirement of taking his daughter as... wife? Concubine? There has been something similar practiced by the Yoni and Brimtouched of old, and it is sometimes still used in the homelands of a few of the royal families.
You're talking about the Auskugi.
Yethis said glumly, having just rapidly finished her second glass of wine to try and come to grips with the situation at hand.
However, when they are tied to a title, they are then Auskugili. The difference is that they are normally taken when the queen cannot entertain the king's desires, but do not produce heirs, used as a royal plaything, really. When the queen becomes or is found to be barren and cannot give children, they then start producing royal heirs, and their title changes.
Erinda Caine tilted her head at the Valley Elf.
You study Yoni and Brimtouched cultures in your off time.
The parts that interest me.
Yethis said with a tongue of daggers, her eyes flicking over to stare at Alavara through her lowered eyelashes. Alavara made a pointed note to not even look at Yethis, instead keeping her eyes on Yule.
This is a uncomfortable and rather unique situation, but I believe we can figure this out in the long run,
Alavara said, crossing her arms.
This is, after all, a war for survival, even if there are some on this world that are sitting on their hands and hoping someone else can take care of it for them.
Domino reached up and pointed a finger at Yule, in which Yule gave him another finger in response. Alavara chuckled, hearing the two's thoughts at each other, but her smile died on her face when she heard a knocking at the room's door, and another mind entered her radius. Yule looked over to Alavara, eyebrows raised, and when she nodded, his face became more serious than it had been before. A staff member walked over briskly and opened the door, and there standing in the doorway was Little Ear Nimi Curhi. Around her face she still wore her odd shawl, hiding everything below her nose, and her bright amber eyes looked around the room. Both Alavara and Yule could tell she was nervous because her ears were shaking just enough to be noticeable. Then again, there was also an upside-down couch behind Yule.
I am of
Nimi began, her light voice faltering as she tried to find the inner strength to speak.
I am of bringing word of our contract being written. We are off to meet in the Queen's chambers and speak of it.
Chix and Domino looked over to Yule, who was staring hard at Nimi and trying to figure out how to even address her. Alavara tilted her head at the odd Serbnian woman, while Yethis glared into the wall in front of her. Erinda Caine, on the other hand, placed her fist on her hips, looking at the Serbnian openly as she rolled her gaze up and down.
They really did not get the details down right in those old books.
Erinda Caine said plainly, causing Nimi to push her shawl higher up around her embarrassed eyes, her purple hair bunching up around it. "Why did they send you?" Yule asked finally, his voice nearly making Nimi jump backwards out of the doorway. Nimi fumbled with her words for a few more breaths, her eyes wide and staring at Yule.
Because of agreement.
Domino said, slipping his hands into his pockets.
She's already trying to fill her role.
Chix got out of her chair, walking towards the Serbnian and brushing imaginary dust from her shoulder.
Don't worry, we won't be too hard on you. Though we should warn you about Yule's growly attitude.
Alavara blinked at Chix with eyes narrowed in dry humor, as she was more or less getting pelted with the nervous, shy energy of Nimi flooding the room. "Let's go get this over with," Yule mumbled, brushing past Nimi as she stepped out of the doorway and into the hallway. Yule noted with a mixed emotion of bewilderment and confusion that Nimi was walking just behind and to the right of Alavara, the crimson-haired Valley Elf also occasionally glancing over her shoulder at the Serbnian just behind her. Yethis was still seething behind them all, and Yule could actually hear her grinding her teeth from time to time. Domino, Chix, and Erinda Caine lingered behind the other elf, just in case she drew a sidearm and tried to shoot Nimi between her shoulder blades. Nimi quickly stepped forward to open the door for Yule and Alavara, who nodded their heads to her as they stepped through, but Yethis almost spat out a foul curse when Nimi quickly stepped in front of her and let go of the door. She was only wrangled to silence by the calm but heavy hand of Erinda Caine on her shoulder, who opened the door wider and quietly steered the Valley Elf through. Big Ear Curhie and Queen Madmiran were already waiting for them, and Yule looked at the thick stack of papers sitting before a rather portly-looking Brimtouch that was completely bald. "That was quick," Yule murmured aloud, stepping up to the table. "I was under the impression this would take a few days." The bald Brimtouch chuckled.
"Seconds are of the essence in times of war. Queen Madmiran has tasked me with creating this contract post-haste and with much accuracy. And we of the merchant guilds have quite a few tricks up our sleeves."
"Tell me your tricks," Yule stated flatly, more as a demand than a question. The balding Brimtouch held up his hands.
"Nothing too dangerous, mind. We have enchanted tools that help us craft these contracts faster, able to pen mine to paper without even touching the quill."
Enchanted quills.
Queen Madmiran said with a polite nod.
Allows them to think something and the quill writes it down. Mr. Marill here had the entire staff write this up with expedited expertise, double and triple checking to make sure all things were in accordance with both your and Big Ear Curhie's wishes.
"I see," Yule said as his people formed up around him, with Nimi taking her place beside Alavara, something that made her father smile. "Let's get on with this, then." Queen Madmiran stepped up to the table proper, standing beside Mr. Marill, who patted his forehead with a handkerchief.
The Serbnyans, led by Big Ear Curhie, are entering into an agreement for the lifespan of the two races of human and Serbnyan. This agreement will stay in effect until the decimation of the last.
A quadral pact.
Erinda Caine said aloud, her eyes wide. Queen Madmiran nodded.
The very same. This contract survives as long as the races do.
With that, Mr. Marill went into the fine details of the agreement, tapping the papers and reading them without moving the pages.
"Transported by teleportation circle, a first cache of stone shall be delivered to Yule by the morning of the day after the agreement is signed. This has been offered and confirmed by Big Ear Anwa Curhie. Queen Madmiran has offered her own circle to be the rival point of the stone, and shall be used to transport all personnel of Yule back to Illinois. This has been confirmed by the pendulum. Yule shall pay for a single urn of stone and goods for the price of 5 king's gold. Do you agree, Warlord Yule?"
"I agree," Yule replied without even an ounce of hesitation, something that made Big Ear Curhy squint in confusion. He had expected Yule to negotiate. Even Mr. Marill seemed caught off guard, clearing his throat and pulling out the page required. He tapped it twice, and a quill zoomed out of his pocket, scribbling down onto the paper. The ink flashed gold, then dulled back to black.
Dependent on weather and travel, the stone shall be transported to Chapsdale City for departure to Illinois, whether that is by caravan or teleportation circle. This agreement is only between the humans and the Serbnyans. As such, Big Ear Kahee confirms that no other race shall enter free trade for the stone. If found in violation of this agreement, the Serbnyans will pay back all monetary gains paid by the humans, or forfeit land. If they refuse, the Serbnyans shall enter conflict with the humans, with humanity having all rights to take, seize, and destroy what they see fit within the lonely Icelands. If humans refuse this option, they may petition the courts of Yethis.
Mr. Marill said, patting the large stack of papers.
Everything is written here, but that is the short and cross of it. Monetary value exchange for goods, with tight contractual obligation that it only happens between these two races present.
Big Ear Curhy cleared his throat. And what of our other agreement? Mr. Marill said, his face souring.
Yes, the agreement pertaining to Little Ear Nimi Kahee.
Yule heard the Serbnian breathe in deeply beside Alavara, and his own face soured as well.
Little Ear Nimi Kahee shall, for all intents and persuasions, be taken as secondary consort to Warlord Yule, as per agreements between her father and he. She shall retain all rights of that of wife and companion, regardless of what she is called or named as by Yule. As such, she shall take the same portion of liberties and compensations as Alavara Yule in terms of property. This is to solidify the obligations and contracts between humans and Serbnyan, unifying the two races under equal stakes.
Mr. Marill said, and even he sounded uncomfortable by the agreement. Everyone's faces were equally sour, except for the Serbnyans. The Serbnyans believed this set them on equal footing with the humans, and as such, above everyone else. By one of their own being wife to the most powerful human in the world, they were second only to the Valley Elves in their minds. In their culture, one elevates all. Mr. Marill went on to explain the rest of the contract, such as the finer details of payment delivery, access rights to the teleportation circle as per necessary, as well as the Queen's cut of Big Ear Curhy's payment since she was helping the entire thing along and being a middleman. By the time they were done within the room, after making a few minor changes, everyone left the room with an air of fatigue that only dealing with paperwork can bring. Queen Madmiran walked beside you as everyone else stayed a few steps behind with her guard.
Are you satisfied?
Queen Madmiran asked quietly, turning to look at Yule out of the side of her eyes. Yule growled in his throat for a moment, then murmured back to her, I have what I need to keep this war going. The rest I can deal with. Can you get me and my troops back through your circle?
I can. It will save you quite a bit of time.
Queen Madmiran assured, nodding to Yule.
I find it to be the least I can do, but the circle is quite small. The stones alone will take a day or two to teleport, as Big Ear Curhy brought half your first shipment with him, and I can only fit maybe 10 men at a time upon the circle.
That is fine, Yule said, sighing out with reserved annoyance. Still beats walking, I suppose. May I attend your husband's funeral? Queen Madmiran smiled sadly at Yule, and she nodded once again. And that is the end of Chapter 12 of Book 4, The Veil Riders. If you like this story and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel of Garbro's Field Desk. Join us on Discord, join me on X, join us on Twitch when we stream the game live, the RPG game. If you want to play in this universe, well, hey, there's a whole fucking game book we made that's revolving around this narrative universe. And you too can play a fucking weird-ass Serbnian inside the game. Now, if you really want to help the channel out, you can join us on Ko-fi and donate $1 or $2 to us to help keep this thing going. You know, YouTube is just kind of a big poo-poo fart pants when it comes to helping me fund the, the stories. But there are those who give money every month, and these guys help us keep the channel running. There's the First Shirts, the E4 Mafia, and Snuffy Squad. The First Shirts give $50 per month, and these guys keep this thing fucking rolling. And we have another one, actually. We have Some Dude, Allspark113, E Machino, Cody Jero, Death's Dancer, and Insane Medic. These guys carry this channel on their shoulders, and I do mean that. Like, Insane Medic has given over $1,000. Death's Dancer, over $2,000. Cody Jero, he's nearing $1,000. That's more money than YouTube is ever going to give me. And they've been giving it to me since 2022, 2023. They've been helping support the stories they like. Then there's the E4 Mafia. These guys give $25 per month and just help keep propping up that stage. There's the Great Baguette. I guess I said it right this time. Let's go. Poggers and chat, my fellow streamers. Sonic Arrow, Splug the Goblin, Dark Side, Kiwi Bastard, Lacune 8, Lacune, Josh Beatty, Matty Boy, and Crusader 0625. And then there's Stuffy Squad. These guys give $5 per month. Let's see here. Can I do all one still? Split Iris Bear, Super Sting 64, Elderock, Croman, Dalek, Jules, Blonde Lord, Thrace Vega, Devin Seanholtz, Andrew N. Gill, Yeti Potato, Skelters, Kite Zero, Classic Cthulhu, Red Inspired, Diesel Dog, Coffee Commander, Anto, Inquisitor Matt, Duncan D, and Ein, the Lore Smith. Ooh, it's getting difficult now. Got to... Better wet my whistle for the next part. Ugh. And until we see you next time on this side of the veil, that was Rue, that was Technoward, that was Hailey, that was Vynn, that was Franner, our proofreader, and this is Garbro's Field Desk. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.